The first person Duke Alaric saw when the doors of Blackthorn Hall opened was the woman he had condemned and believed dead. A year earlier, he had stripped Evelina of her title, erased her name from his household, and sent her into exile as a traitor. Now she entered beneath Edrath's banners beside Prince Cassian, the enemy Alaric had failed to defeat. The nobles fell silent. At Alaric's right sat Rosamond, Evelina's younger sister, and his new wife, wearing the ducal crown that had once rested on Evelina's head. Yet its gold could not hide the fear crossing her face when she saw what Evelina carried. It was not a sword. It was Edrath's command seal, the mark of the strategist who had broken Blackthorn's alliances, won the border provinces without battle, and forced Alaric to ask his enemy for peace. Evelina stopped before the throne and placed a sealed document between them. She reminded Alaric that he had condemned her with letters she never wrote, and that the truth he refused to hear had come to judge him. Rosamond recognized the seal and turned pale. Before anyone could open the document, the story returned to the winter, when Evelina still loved the Duke. How had the woman he cast away become his enemy's most powerful weapon? 1 year earlier, before accusation turned love into hatred, Evelina Vale was still the Duchess of Blackthorn, and much of the duchy survived because of her. The winter had arrived early and without mercy. Snow buried the northern roads, rivers hardened beneath sheets of ice, and food disappeared faster than the castle's officials could replace it. While Duke Alaric strengthened the border and prepared his soldiers for war, Evelina turned her attention to the families who would never survive until spring without help. She opened the ducal grain stores, reorganized deliveries to the poorest villages, and persuaded merchants to release supplies at fair prices instead of profiting from desperation. When several traders refused, she offered them future access to Blackthorn's markets in exchange for immediate cooperation. Within weeks, starving villages began receiving bread again. The people praised Alaric for protecting their land, but those closest to the court knew that Evelina was quietly keeping it alive. Alaric loved his wife, though affection rarely came easily to him. He had been raised to believe that a duke protected through strength, discipline, and command. Whenever danger approached, he placed himself between Evelina and the threat, never realizing how often her judgment stood between him and disaster. Their marriage was not unhappy. There were still warm evenings beside the fire, private smiles across crowded halls, and moments when the weight of the duchy seemed lighter because they carried it together. But the war with Edrath had begun changing Alaric. Border villages were raided without warning. Supply wagons vanished along guarded roads. Blackthorn soldiers were found dead beneath banners belonging to Prince Cassian, the ruler Alaric had come to regard as his greatest enemy. With every attack, Alaric became more suspicious. Someone inside Blackthorn was passing information across the border. Someone close enough to know where soldiers would march and when supplies would move. Lord Vero, Alaric's oldest advisor, quietly fed that fear. He never accused anyone directly. He merely reminded the Duke that betrayal rarely came from strangers. It came from those who had already earned the right to stand near the throne. Then Rosamond arrived at Blackthorn Castle. Evelina welcomed her younger sister with open arms. Their father had recently died, leaving Rosamond without a secure home, and Evelina believed the castle might offer her comfort. She did not see the resentment Rosamond carried beneath her grief. For years, Rosamond had watched Evelina receive the admiration she wanted. Evelina was the clever sister, the graceful sister, the one who married a powerful duke and became beloved by an entire duchy. Now Rosamond saw Alaric listening to Evelina during council meetings. She saw servants lower their heads when the Duchess passed, and villagers bless her name. And envy began growing, where sisterly love should have been. Varro noticed. He praised Rosamond's beauty, her gentleness, and her understanding of what a powerful husband needed. Slowly, he convinced her that Evelina's cautious advice made Alaric appear weak before his generals. He suggested that another woman, one less argumentative, less independent, and more willing to admire him, would make a far better duchess. Rosamond did not believe she was helping destroy her sister. She told herself Varro only wanted access to Evelina's private letters so he could expose her criticism of Alaric and create a temporary quarrel between them. She handed him the key. Varro copied Evelina's handwriting, reproduced her seal, and returned everything before anyone noticed. At the same time, Evelina discovered troubling gaps in the military accounts. Large sums had vanished from the treasury, yet the soldiers stationed along the border were receiving fewer weapons and less food. Before she could trace the missing funds, a Blackthorn patrol was ambushed. Dozens of men were killed. When Varro delivered the news, he told Alaric that the enemy had known the patrol's secret route. It was a route shared only with the Duke, his wife, and the most trusted members of his council. That same night, guards searched Evelina's private chamber. Hidden beneath her correspondence, they found a sealed letter addressed to Prince Cassian of Edrath. By dawn, the sealed letter had become more dangerous than any weapon carried across Blackthorn's borders. Alaric summoned the royal council before Evelina was given time to understand what had been found. Nobles, commanders, and senior officials gathered inside the great hall, while the names of the soldiers killed in the ambush still hung heavily over the court. Evelina entered expecting questions. Instead, she found judgment already waiting for her. The letter lay open before Alaric. It was written in handwriting almost identical to hers and stamped with her private seal. Every detail had been chosen carefully. It revealed the secret route taken by the murdered patrol and promised Prince Cassian more information in exchange for Blackthorn's defeat. Evelina read it once, then again. She recognized the shape of every letter, yet none of the words belonged to her. Before she could fully defend herself, Varro presented another witness. A frightened servant stepped forward and claimed he had seen Evelina near the chapel several nights earlier, speaking with a hooded stranger. According to him, the stranger had carried the colors of Edrath beneath his cloak. The accusation spread through the council like fire through dry grass. Then the guards opened Evelina's locked cabinet. Inside was a purse filled with Edrathian silver. The evidence appeared complete. The letter proved she had shared the patrol route. The servant placed her with an enemy messenger. The money suggested she had been paid. Only Varro knew how carefully each piece had been planted. Evelina did not beg at first. She forced herself to remain calm and explained that the letter had been forged. She asked Alaric to inspect the ink, compare the seal with the original, and question every servant who had entered her chambers. She explained that the silver had come from foreign merchants who purchased grain during the winter shortages. Their payment had been recorded by the treasury. But when the account books were brought forward, the page containing that transaction was missing. Someone had removed it. Evelina turned toward Alaric, certain that he would understand what that meant. The disappearance of the record should have raised suspicion. Instead, she saw only grief and anger in his face. The bodies of his soldiers had not yet been buried. Varro reminded the council that the murdered men had trusted their duke to protect them. He warned that if Alaric allowed affection to interfere with justice, every commander in Blackthorn would believe the life of his wife mattered more than the lives of those who served him. Rosamond stepped forward as though she meant to defend her sister. She spoke of Evelina's kindness, her devotion to the villagers, and the years she had spent beside Alaric. But then, with practiced hesitation, she mentioned that Evelina had recently questioned whether Blackthorn could defeat Edrath. The words sounded harmless. In that hall, they became another blade. Rosamond's statement made Evelina appear doubtful of her husband's leadership and strangely sympathetic toward his enemy. Alaric asked whether Evelina had ever communicated with anyone across the border. For the first time, she hesitated. Months earlier, when fever had spread through the northern villages, Evelina had secretly contacted an Edrathian physician who possessed the medicine Blackthorn needed. Alaric had forbidden all communication with Edrath, fearing that enemy agents would use trade routes to enter the duchy. Evelina had disobeyed him to save sick children. She admitted it before the council. The truth should have proved her compassion. Instead, Varro turned it into confirmation that she had maintained secret contact with the enemy and was capable of hiding it from her husband. Alaric's expression hardened. Evelina reminded him of everything they had shared. She reminded him of the winter they survived together, the villages she had protected, and the council meetings where she had stood beside him when others doubted his rule. She asked him to remember the woman he had married, but grief had already made suspicion easier than trust. Alaric looked at her as though he were searching for a stranger behind the face he loved. Then he admitted that he no longer knew who she was. That answer broke something within her. He refused her request for a private investigation. Before the assembled court, he declared Evelina guilty of betraying Blackthorn. Their marriage was dissolved. Her title was taken. Her name was ordered removed from the ducal household, as though the years she had spent building Blackthorn could be erased with a command. Alaric sentenced her to permanent exile. He did not order her execution. In his own mind, he called that mercy. But as the guards took her arms, Evelina finally understood that death was not the cruelest punishment he could have chosen. The cruelest punishment was learning that the man she loved had trusted forged paper, missing records, and frightened witnesses more than he had ever trusted her. She looked toward Rosamond one final time. Her sister lowered her eyes. As Evelina was led from the hall, Varro moved close enough for only her to hear him. With quiet satisfaction, he promised that by the following day, even the Duke would believe she had died while fleeing to the enemy she supposedly served. Evelina left Blackthorn Castle before sunrise, locked inside a guarded carriage with iron across its windows. The road toward the eastern border was buried beneath snow, and every turn carried her farther from the home she had helped save. For 2 days, she spoke to no one. Some part of her still waited for hoofbeats behind them. She imagined Alaric discovering the forged records, questioning the witnesses, and sending riders to bring her back before she crossed the border. No riders came. At a roadside post, Evelina overheard 2 soldiers discussing preparations at the castle. Alaric had announced that he would marry Rosamond within the week. Lord Varro had told the court that the union would preserve the bond between Blackthorn and the Vale family after Evelina's disgrace. The news destroyed the last hope she had refused to release. Rosamond had not merely remained silent while her sister was condemned. She had stepped into the place Evelina left behind. At Blackthorn Castle, Rosamond accepted the proposal with tears mistaken for humility. She told herself the marriage would protect their family from ruin and prove that the Vale name remained loyal. Beneath those excuses lay the desire she had hidden for years. For once, she would be the sister who was chosen. Alaric offered her no love. He offered duty. Varro convinced him that Blackthorn needed a new duchess before fear spread through the court. Rosamond promised to repair the damage Evelina had supposedly caused, and Alaric, still mistaking action for strength, agreed. The wedding took place beneath the same ceiling where Evelina had been judged. Rosamond wore her sister's crown and received the bows of nobles who had once praised Evelina. Yet Alaric remained distant. During the celebration, he remembered Evelina in the winter grain stores, the quiet smile she gave him after difficult counsels, and the warmth of her hand inside his. Rosamond saw those memories in his face. She had gained Evelina's title, chambers, jewels, and husband, but not the place Evelina still occupied in his heart. Far from the wedding music, the carriage entered the forest near the Adrathian border. The soldiers suddenly stopped. One ordered Evelina outside. Another drew his sword. She understood at once that exile had never been Varro's true plan. They intended to kill her, burn the carriage, and leave evidence suggesting that Adrathian raiders had rescued the traitor. Her supposed escape would make Alaric believe the accusation completely. When the first soldier reached for her, Evelina struck him with the chain around her wrists and ran. An arrow tore across her shoulder before she reached the trees. Blood soaked her sleeve, but she kept moving through the snow as the soldiers followed. Their pursuit ended when masked riders emerged between the pines. Steel flashed. Horses screamed. Within moments, some of her escorts lay dead, while the survivors were dragged from their saddles. Weak from blood loss, Evelina collapsed. She awoke inside a stone chamber, warmed by a low fire. Her wound had been cleaned, and the iron had been removed from her wrists. A tall man stood beside the window, holding a familiar letter. Prince Cassian of Edrath turned toward her, the enemy she had been accused of secretly serving. The letter carried her name and copied seal, but Cassian explained that it had never reached him. Someone had created it, only so Alaric would believe she had betrayed him. Now Alaric had delivered into his enemy's hands a woman who understood Blackthorn's court, its armies, and every weakness behind its walls. Cassian wanted one reason he should not use her. Cassian did not begin with kindness. The morning after Evelina woke, he brought her to a council chamber overlooking the frozen eastern valley. Maps covered the table. Wooden markers showed Blackthorn's forts, mountain passes, supply roads, and border villages. Then, he began asking questions. How many soldiers guarded the northern gate? Which commanders remained loyal to Alaric? Where were the grain stores hidden? Which walls of Blackthorn Castle were weakest? Evelina answered none of them. Cassian reminded her that Alaric had stripped her title, replaced her with her own sister, and sent her toward a death disguised as exile. Evelina replied that Alaric's betrayal had not made the people of Blackthorn her enemies. Her anger belonged to the Duke and those who had framed her. She would not purchase safety with the lives of villagers who had once trusted her. That refusal unsettled Cassian more than cooperation would have. He had expected bitterness. He had expected revenge. Instead, the woman Alaric had condemned still protected the land that had rejected her. Cassian dismissed the guards and told her what Blackthorn did not know. Many attacks blamed on Edrath had never been ordered by him. His caravans had vanished along the border. Adrathian soldiers had also been found dead beneath blackthorn banners, and each killing pushed both territories closer to war. Someone wanted Alaric and Cassian fighting. Evelina remembered the missing military funds, the reduced supplies, and the secret route revealed to the ambushed patrol. The pattern no longer looked like simple treason. It looked like a system designed to profit from fear, while both sides blamed each other. Cassian offered her protection, but he did not pretend generosity was his only motive. Her knowledge of Blackthorn's court made her useful. Her survival could weaken Alaric's authority. If the nobles learned that the disgraced Duchess lived beneath Edrath's protection, suspicion would spread through the council that condemned her. Evelina refused to become another man's weapon. She would help expose the corruption behind the war, but only on her terms. Cassian would not attack innocent Blackthorn citizens. Prisoners taken by Edrath would be treated humanely, and no proclamation, letter, or political claim would carry Evelina's name without her approval. Cassian's commanders objected. They argued that a woman with no title had no right to bargain with a prince. Cassian ignored them. For the first time since the accusation, a powerful man listened to Evelina's conditions before deciding what she deserved. He accepted all three. Then he tested her. Cassian placed months of raid reports, merchant ledgers, and military records before her. By evening, Evelina had noticed what his generals had missed. The attacks did not follow army movements. They followed grain. Caravans were struck after leaving storage towns. Wagons disappeared before winter shortages. Stolen supplies were sold through foreign traders, while Blackthorn and Edrath blamed each other for the losses. The war was not being fed by hatred alone. Someone was making a fortune from it. Cassian studied Evelina differently after that. She was no longer merely a discarded duchess whose name could divide an enemy court. She was a strategist, capable of seeing the design beneath the chaos. Their alliance began not with trust, but with the uneasy recognition that they needed one another. Near midnight, Evelina found a small mark pressed into the wax beside one of the stolen shipment accounts. She had seen it many times in Blackthorn's treasury. It was Lord Varro's private financial seal. The mark on the stolen accounts changed everything. Until that night, Evelina had possessed only suspicion and wounds no court would accept as proof. Varro's seal gave her something stronger, a path. Over the months that followed, she traced it through Edrath's trade records, military reports, noble alliances, and coded correspondence. Diplomacy was already familiar to her. What Cassian taught her was how rulers used fear as carefully as armies used steel. A rumor could empty a market. A forged report could move soldiers toward the wrong border. A well-timed pardon could divide an enemy camp without a sword being raised. Yet Evelina changed Cassian as well. He had ruled Edrath through discipline because discipline had kept him alive. She showed him that obedience and loyalty were not the same. People might fear a ruler, but they would defend one who had defended them first. Their first proof came when winter shortages threatened the border. Cassian's commanders wanted to keep captured grain for the army. Evelina persuaded him to divide it among starving villages on both sides, including those still loyal to Blackthorn. The decision angered his council, but it prevented famine. Soon, travelers carried stories of the exiled duchess who fed families abandoned by two rulers. Her name, once spoken with shame in Blackthorn, began to mean protection. Cassian gave her a seat on his war council. Several commanders resisted. To them, Evelina was still Alaric's former wife, a woman without an army, title, or proven loyalty to Edrath. She answered their doubt with results. While studying intercepted supply orders, Evelina noticed that 3 merchant roads had been left strangely unguarded. The pattern matched the earlier grain raids. She predicted that Varro's mercenaries would attack the village of Dunmere, burn its stores, and leave blackthorn weapons behind to blame Edrath. Cassian trusted her judgment. The village was evacuated before sunset. When the mercenaries arrived, they found empty homes, hidden soldiers, and witnesses waiting to identify them. The attack failed, and several men were captured alive. After that, the commanders stopped asking why Evelina sat at the table. Her influence did not come from becoming a warrior. It came from seeing what others overlooked and acting before fear controlled the room. As their work continued, the distance between Evelina and Cassian slowly changed. He never demanded that she forget Alaric. He understood that love did not vanish simply because it had been betrayed. Some nights, Evelina still remembered the man Alaric had been, before suspicion hardened him. Cassian never used those memories against her. In return, she began seeing the loneliness beneath his restraint. Years earlier, Cassian's parents and younger brother had been killed during a border conflict Blackthorn's rulers could have ended. Since then, he had treated trust as a weakness and affection as something enemies could exploit. Together, they followed Varro's trail. They found payments made to the servant who testified against Evelina. They uncovered orders tied to the attack on her carriage. They traced the raids to money stolen from Blackthorn's military treasury. Then, an Edrathian spy reported that a royal cipher book had disappeared from Alaric's archive days before the forged letter was discovered. Evelina finally understood how her guilt had been manufactured. She wanted the evidence released at once, but Cassian urged patience. If the proof came from Edrath alone, Alaric's nobles would dismiss it as enemy deception. They needed original records and witnesses Blackthorn could not deny. For the first time, clearing her name was no longer Evelina's only purpose. Varro had poisoned 2 kingdoms through one frightened court. She intended not only to expose him, but to destroy the system that had allowed him to control so much. Then Cassian placed the disputed province of Greyhaven under her command. It was Blackthorn's richest border territory, and Alaric was already preparing to reclaim it by force. Now Evelina faced the question that would decide what she had become. Could she defeat the man who had destroyed her without becoming the traitor he had accused her of being? Greyhaven had always been more than a province. Its rivers carried grain toward both kingdoms, its roads connected 3 major trade routes, and its stone fortresses guarded the narrowest passage through the eastern mountains. Blackthorn claimed it by inheritance. Edrath claimed it by treaty. The people who lived there had grown tired of being treated like property. When Alaric learned that Cassian had placed Greyhaven under Evelina's command, he prepared to reclaim it with soldiers. He gathered cavalry near the western road and ordered the provincial governor to secure every gate before Edrath could establish control. Evelina did not send an army to meet him. Instead, she sent auditors. For years, Governor Marlowe had collected taxes in Alaric's name, while keeping nearly half for himself. Grain, meant for poor districts, had been locked inside private warehouses and sold at inflated prices. Families who could not pay were driven from their farms, while soldiers were ordered to silence anyone who complained. Evelina gathered the records, questioned merchants, and released the testimony publicly. Then she did what the governor had failed to do. She opened Cassian's grain stores to Greyhaven's villages, sent physicians into districts suffering from fever, and issued written guarantees that the province would choose its own representatives if it accepted Edrath's protection. There were no threats. There was no siege. By the time Alaric's army reached the border, Greyhaven's council had already arrested Governor Marlowe and rejected Blackthorn's authority. Evelina had taken the province without spilling a drop of blood. When the reports reached Alaric, he studied them long after the council chamber had emptied. He recognized the strategy immediately. It was the same method Evelina had used during Blackthorn's harshest winter: identify the suffering everyone else ignored, offer relief before demanding loyalty, and make resistance appear cruel rather than brave. No Edrathian commander would have understood Blackthorn's people so well. Only Evelina could have done it. For the first time since her supposed death, Alaric allowed himself to believe that she was alive. The possibility brought relief for only a moment. If Evelina lived, then Varro's claim that she had fled willingly with Edrath became harder to accept. If she truly served Cassian, why had she protected Blackthorn villagers instead of attacking them? Why had Greyhaven changed allegiance without a single execution? Doubt began reopening every question Alaric had once refused to ask. His marriage to Rosamond had already become a cold arrangement of shared rooms and carefully avoided truths. She wore the ducal crown, but Alaric rarely looked at her without remembering the woman who had worn it before. Under pressure, Rosamond finally admitted that Varro had once entered Evelina's chambers using a key she provided. She insisted that she believed he wanted only to examine private letters and expose Evelina's criticism of the war. She denied knowing anything about forged evidence or the attack on the prison carriage. Alaric did not know whether to believe her. He began investigating quietly, afraid that if Varro learned of his suspicions, more evidence would disappear. Varro noticed the change in him anyway. He warned Alaric that Evelina had chosen Edrath willingly and was using kindness only to weaken Blackthorn from within. If she was not stopped, more provinces would follow Greyhaven. Yet the more Varro demanded her destruction, the less certain Alaric became. He travelled to Greyhaven under the pretense of negotiating with its council. Evelina stood inside the provincial hall when he arrived. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. She was thinner than he remembered, and something softer had disappeared from her face. But she no longer looked broken. Greyhaven's nobles waited for her judgment. Edrathian soldiers obeyed her commands. Citizens who had once called her a traitor now bowed as she passed. Beside her stood Cassian. Alaric asked to speak with Evelina alone. He told her that he had begun questioning the evidence and asked her to return to Blackthorn while he investigated properly. Evelina's expression did not change. She reminded him that she had asked for an investigation before he destroyed her life. Her innocence had mattered when she stood alone in chains, not only now that she possessed enough power to threaten his rule. Alaric apologized, but Evelina told him that an apology could not restore the marriage he dissolved, the honor he stripped from her, or the trust he shattered before an entire court. Cassian entered before Alaric could answer. He did not touch Evelina or speak for her, but his presence made one truth unmistakable. She was no longer alone. Alaric saw the trust between them and understood that even if Evelina's name was cleared, she might never return to him. Before leaving Greyhaven, he pressed a torn page into her hand. It came from Blackthorn's missing royal cipher book. Its markings matched the code used in the letter that condemned her. For the first time, Evelina held proof taken from Alaric's own archive. Proof that the traitor had never been outside his council. The torn cipher page confirmed what Evelina had suspected, from the moment she found Varro's seal among the stolen grain records. She placed the page beside the letter that had condemned her and compared every symbol. The same coded markings appeared beneath the false promises written in her name. When the financial records, payments to the servant, and orders connected to her attempted murder were added, the path led back to one man. Lord Varro had created the evidence. At last, Evelina could prove that she had never betrayed Blackthorn. But before relief could settle within her, another truth came to light. Cassian entered the council chamber while she was examining the documents. He saw the cipher page in her hands and understood that the moment he had delayed could no longer be avoided. Long before his riders found Evelina bleeding in the border forest, one of Cassian's spies had examined another letter, supposedly sent to Edrath. The paper had come from Blackthorn's royal archive. The wax carried traces of a substance used by the ducal scribes, and the writing was too carefully formed to be natural. Cassian had suspected from the beginning that Evelina was innocent, yet he had not told her. He had allowed her to believe that Alaric alone possessed the power to uncover the truth because her anger made her useful. A wounded duchess seeking justice could divide Blackthorn's court, expose its weaknesses, and help Edrath gain control of the border. Their alliance had begun with manipulation. Cassian's feelings had changed over the months. What began as strategy had become respect, and respect had deepened into something he had never intended to feel. But affection could not alter the way he had first used her pain. Evelina listened without interrupting. Once again, a powerful man had decided what truth she was permitted to know. Alaric had condemned her without listening. Cassian had protected her while withholding the one fact that might have allowed her to make a free choice. The two betrayals were different, but both had treated her life as something that could be directed for another man's purpose. Evelina removed Edrath's command seal from her cloak and placed it on the table. She would not return to Alaric because he regretted losing her. She would not remain beside Cassian merely because his manipulation had become love. She had survived being called a traitor, stripped of her title, and turned into a symbol for another kingdom. She would belong to neither ruler. Cassian did not order the doors closed. He did not remind her that she owed him her life or demand that she forgive him. Instead, he returned the evidence they had gathered, left the command seal within her reach, and gave her complete freedom to decide what came next. His choice separated him from Alaric, but it did not erase the deception. Before Evelina could leave Greyhaven, a secret message arrived from Blackthorn Castle. It had been written by Rosamond. Her sister's confession revealed that she had given Varro access to Evelina's letters out of jealousy. She had wanted to cause a quarrel between Evelina and Alaric. She had wanted, for once, to be the sister Alaric noticed. She claimed she had never known Varro would forge evidence, murder soldiers, or order Evelina's death. But Rosamond's message contained something even more urgent. Varro was preparing for the Royal Peace Summit. Alaric and Cassian would soon gather at Blackthorn Castle to negotiate an end to the border conflict. Varro had hidden mercenaries among the guards and servants. Once both rulers were inside the Great Hall, his men would assassinate them and leave evidence blaming each kingdom for the other's death. War would become unavoidable. In the chaos, Varro intended to place Blackthorn under emergency rule, using Rosamond as a frightened duchess whose authority he could control. Only then did Rosamond understand that Varro had never intended to make her powerful. He had needed a woman insecure enough to betray her sister and weak enough to obey him afterward. She begged Evelina to stop the killings, Evelina now possessed enough evidence to destroy everyone who had used her. She could expose Rosamund's jealousy, Alaric's injustice, Cassian's manipulation, and Varro's treason before 2 kingdoms. But revenge alone would leave thousands of innocent people trapped in the war that followed. The most dangerous weapon Evelina carried was not her knowledge of Blackthorn's armies or the secrets of its walls. It was the truth behind every lie holding the conflict together. On the morning of the peace summit, Evelina entered Blackthorn Castle beside Cassian, and somewhere among the guards waiting inside, Varro's assassins were already preparing to strike. The great hall of Blackthorn Castle had not changed since the day Evelina was condemned. The same banners hung above the council chamber, the same nobles occupied the carved benches. Even the stone beneath her feet seemed to remember the sound of chains dragging across it. But Evelina had changed. She now stood beside Prince Cassian, before representatives of 2 kingdoms, carrying the truth that Blackthorn had once refused to hear. At the far end of the hall, Alaric sat beneath the ducal crest. Rosamund remained beside him, wearing the crown that had once belonged to her sister. Lord Varro stood near the council table with the calm expression of a man who still believed every outcome rested in his hands. Evelina placed the sealed documents before the assembled nobles. One by one, she revealed the forged letters bearing her copied handwriting. She produced the missing page from Blackthorn's royal cipher book and demonstrated how its codes had been used to manufacture messages to Edrath. Next came records showing payments made to the servant who had testified against her. There were written orders connecting Varro to the attack on her prison carriage, financial accounts proving that Blackthorn's stolen military funds had financed the border raids, and merchant ledgers tracing the stolen grain through foreign markets. Finally, Evelina presented Rosamund's signed confession. The silence inside the hall deepened. Varro recovered first. He accused Evelina of creating the evidence under Cassian's direction. He claimed that Edrath had transformed a bitter former duchess into an instrument of revenge, and now intended to use her name to break Blackthorn from within. Several nobles began murmuring. Then Rosamund rose. Her hands trembled as she removed the ducal crown from her head and placed it upon the table. Before Alaric, Evelina, and the court, Rosamund admitted that jealousy had made her betray her sister's trust. She had given Varro access to Evelina's private correspondence because she wanted to weaken Evelina's marriage and, for once, become the sister Alaric noticed. She confessed that ambition had persuaded her to marry the Duke, while Evelina's fate remained unknown. Rosamund had not ordered the border attacks. She had not created the forged letters or commanded the soldiers to murder Evelina, but she acknowledged that none of it might have happened if she had not opened the door for Varro. Her confession stripped away his final defense. Varro's expression changed. He raised one hand. At once, armed men moved through the hall. Several guards turned their weapons toward Alaric's throne, while others barred the doors and surrounded Cassian's delegation. Nobles scattered from the center aisle. Alaric reached for his sword. Cassian's soldiers moved around their prince. For one dangerous moment, the hall stood on the edge of a massacre that could ignite the war Varro wanted. But Evelina had expected his move. Before the summit, she had secretly arranged for trusted Blackthorn soldiers and Adrathian guards to exchange several positions. Varro's mercenaries discovered that the armory had already been locked, the bell tower secured, and every outer gate placed under the command of men who knew the truth. His trap had closed around him. Desperate, Varro seized Rosamond and pressed a blade against her throat. Alaric started forward, but Evelina stopped him. One reckless attack would give Varro's remaining men a reason to strike. Instead, Evelina exposed the secret that held his private army together. Varro had purchased loyalty with money stolen from Blackthorn's military treasury. For years, his mercenaries had obeyed because he paid them more than either kingdom could offer. But those payments no longer existed. Using the financial routes she discovered, Evelina had intercepted the latest shipment of gold. Every mercenary in the hall had already received an offer: surrender, testify against Varro, and receive a royal pardon for crimes committed under his command. One man lowered his weapon, then another followed. Within moments, most of Varro's soldiers had stepped away from him. His power vanished as quickly as it had been purchased. Varro released Rosamond and lunged toward Evelina. Cassian moved to protect her, but Evelina was already prepared. Months of watching Edrath's soldiers train had taught her enough to turn aside the first strike. She caught Varro's wrist, used his momentum against him, and drove him to the stone floor before he could raise the blade again. The royal guards surrounded him. Evelina did not order his death. She had not returned to become an executioner. She had returned to prove that justice could succeed where vengeance would only create another wound. With Varro in chains, Alaric stood before both kingdoms and admitted that Evelina had been innocent. He acknowledged the forged evidence, the grief that had clouded his judgment, and the pressure Varro had placed upon him, but he refused to use any of it as an excuse. He had denied Evelina a proper investigation. He had chosen public certainty over private trust, condemned his wife before frightened nobles, and allowed his authority to become the weapon Varro used against her. Alaric restored Evelina's name, property, and title before the entire court. She accepted the restoration of her honor. She did not accept the restoration of their marriage. The woman he had exiled no longer existed, and the life he had destroyed could not be returned through a declaration. Rosamond was stripped of the ducal crown. Although treason could have cost her life, Evelina asked that she be exiled to a religious estate. Rosamond's confession had not erased her betrayal, but it had helped prevent the assassination and saved both kingdoms from war. Varro was taken away to face trial for murder, theft, conspiracy, and treason. Then Cassian stepped forward. Before the same court, he admitted that he had initially treated Evelina as a strategic advantage. He publicly released her from every promise she had made to Edrath, and recognized her as an independent leader whose loyalty belonged to no throne. Only then did Evelina place the peace agreement before the council. The border war would end. Greyhaven would govern itself, rather than remain a prize passed between rulers. Trade routes would reopen. A joint council would investigate corruption in both territories, and the families of soldiers and villagers harmed by the manufactured raids would receive compensation. The nobles accepted. Some did so because Evelina possessed evidence capable of destroying their reputations. Others agreed because Greyhaven and the border provinces now trusted her more than they trusted either ruler. Evelina had become more powerful than Alaric or Cassian had imagined, not because she commanded the largest army, but because two kingdoms believed her judgment could preserve what their pride had nearly destroyed. Alaric had once believed casting Evelina out would protect his throne. Instead, he had freed her to become the woman who would decide whether his throne deserved to survive. Several months later, Peace settled over the borderlands. The roads between Blackthorn and Edrath reopened. Grain carts replaced military convoys. Abandoned farms were restored, and families once divided by war crossed the frontier without fear. Alaric remained Duke of Blackthorn, but he no longer ruled without question. A reformed council reviewed his decisions, and the voices of merchants, soldiers, and village leaders were finally heard beside those of nobles. He became a wiser ruler, though wisdom could not restore what his pride had destroyed. Evelina did not forgive him immediately. When duty brought them together, they spoke with respect, but the warmth of their marriage never returned. Alaric accepted that regret was his burden to carry, not a reason she should come back. Rosamond lived in exile at a religious estate near the northern hills. There, she helped care for women and children displaced by the war. Her service could not erase her betrayal, but it gave her the chance to become more than the jealous sister who had taken another woman's crown. She never wore that crown again. In Greyhaven, the people gathered to choose their first independent leader. They elected Evelina as chancellor. She answered neither to Blackthorn nor Edrath. She stood before the citizens who trusted her and swore to protect the freedom they had won together. Cassian visited her weeks later without soldiers, banners, or political demands. He apologized once more, not to win her affection, but because she deserved the truth without conditions. He promised that whether she chose him or walked another path, he would honor her freedom. Evelina did not answer immediately. Trust returned slowly through months of honest counsel, quiet companionship, and choices Cassian made when he expected no reward. When she finally accepted his hand, it was not because he had rescued her or because she needed the protection of a prince. She chose him because he had learned to stand beside her without trying to own the power she carried. The Duke had called her a traitor and delivered her into his enemy's hands, but Evelina became no man's weapon. She became the woman whose courage ended a war, and before whose judgment 2 kingdoms lowered their banners. Did Evelina make the right choice by refusing to return to Duke Alaric? And did Rosamond deserve exile instead of death? Share your thoughts in the comments. For more unforgettable stories of royal betrayal, forbidden love, revenge, and courageous women who rise after losing everything, subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss our next story.